Back to the Psalm, and today I'll be sharing lessons from Psalm 102 to 104. Let's just jump right in. Psalm 102 is a prayer of an afflicted man when he's faint and pours out his heart to the Lord as a lament. It's one of the 7 penitential psalms, and the psalmist feels isolated from God and constantly tormented by his enemies. He saw his suffering as an expression of God's wrath, possibly due to sin, which is what we as humans usually do whenever we find ourselves in a place of suffering or in pain. We just automatically assume that it is sin. And remember, even Job and his friends, when Job was suffering, his friends just automatically concluded that he was getting punishment for things that he had done. But we've seen that this isn't always the case. But the psalmist expressed faith in God by the end of the psalm, following his lament. He acknowledged God's greatness and everlasting nature. And this testimony of faith in a difficult time, right, displays God's greatness and his goodness. It also reflects confidence in God's sovereignty. By recognizing God's omnipresence in spite of our circumstances, we receive a new perspective into life. That's what I really took away, and I'll give more details when I get to my lesson about getting to know God. In 103, which was a psalm that David wrote, which is very popular psalm of praise, it expresses a lot of the nature of God, and I've come to know, and these are some of the things that I've come to know and love about him personally. In verses 8 to 14, I was reminded of the things that I know and am convinced about God being good, merciful, and wise. God does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. As our Redeemer, he brought us back from destruction and gave us a new life. Verse 6 to 12 speaks about his righteousness and his justice to all who are oppressed. He's compassionate and tender like a father towards his children. And if you remember, that's something that we'll take back from Exodus 34, 6 to 7. Those verses align. David concluded by saying that all those who take his covenant seriously and live by his commands experience the wonderful reality of his unchanging love. In Psalm 104, which is a psalm of praise to sovereign God for all his creations and his providence, the central theme is the greatness of God and is a description of God's greatness as the creator of the world, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And I like how the psalmist kind of broke it down, starting with the heavens and then the earth. It starts with an amazing description of God as the creator of the heavens, describing an imagery of God riding on the clouds and walking on the wings of the wind with angels as his flame of fire. That was in verse 3 and 4. Then he moved to a description of God creating the earth, laying its foundations, covering it with waters, and then commanding the waters to recede and to their place, and putting a boundary that was set. The Lord had set a boundary for the seas and for the waters to keep them from destruction, and telling them not to cover the earth. That kind of reminded me low-key about the flood, in Noah's time, where they didn't know rain, and it was those waters that had previously been given a boundary that broke forth from the deep and covered the earth. God provided food, shelter, times and seasons, and everything that all his creatures needed, and he gave people's lives meaning and purpose. God essentially is the source of all life. In verse 26, we meet the Leviathan again, is mentioned. Remember, we met the Leviathan in Job 41:4, where he spoke about, and described that seemingly mythical sea creature, but I don't think it's mythical. I actually believe that it exists. And we see that all the creatures depend on the Lord for their sustenance, even the Leviathan. The psalm ends with a call to praise and prayer. That the wicked who spoil the beauty and the purpose of God's creation will cease to exist in a bid for his glory to be magnified. So for God's glory to be magnified, the psalmist called God to get rid of his enemies and, let his people thrive. And these psalms are all very interesting to read. But here's my lesson. God doesn't treat us the way we deserve to be treated. He doesn't hold a grudge or stay angry with us forever. That was from Psalm 103, 8-9. This lets me know how gracious he is and how much grace he gives unto me. We're called to love and to be God's hands and feet here on earth. And so I've taken this as a challenge to not treat others as they deserve, but to treat them as God treats me. That is essentially to offer the grace that I've been offered. I think that's a very powerful challenge, and I encourage you to take the same with me and see how much better life would be if we all treated each other the way God, treated us in this instance. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've learned a good lesson and we'll take up this challenge. Tomorrow we'll be back and we're going back to 2 Samuel. And I'll be sharing lessons from 2 Samuel 5 and then Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 11-12. And just as a heads up, we'll see how these two books are actually similar. So we'll see some, alignment in them. So I'll see you here tomorrow. Have a good day. Bye.